Hello, hi everyone. We will begin in another minute or so. Thank you so much for making time for joining us in this spotlight session. Okay, so let's get started as we have participants trickling in. Um, Once again, thank you so much everyone for making time and welcome to the spotlight session by GSF on ground up partnership models for scaling FLN impact. My name is Ratul. I work with GSF as an innovation manager and insights lead. I work with the innovation impact team with the project on FLN foundational learning. And today I would be moderating the session and we would have speakers who would be joining us and talking about the ground up partnership models as in how they have seen the work happening across different contexts, regions, and why this matters. Before we begin, I think just for us to set pace, it would be great if those who are joining us today could tell us your name, where you are from, and in one word, if you could share, what do you believe is the foundation of an effective partnership? If you would like to use the chat, please do so, or if you may want to speak it out, that's also fine. We would just love to know where you're from, um, and your views on what does it make for an effective partnership. Hello, Kanupriya, welcome. Would love some more responses and would love to know what's your view about partnerships and effective partnerships in general. Okay, amazing. As we have some of these responses coming in, let me just give you a sense of what we are going to do over the next 75 minutes in this spotlight session. Um, we have a fact agenda and we would also make time for interactions with all the participants and between the speakers. So we'd start with a little bit of introduction and context setting, which is happening now. Would give a little bit of framing as to where we are coming with on this particular topic for today. We'll then hear opening remarks from our lovely panelists, just get to know about their context and what do they feel their journey has been on ground up partnerships. Following that, there would be a deep dive into some of the thematic discussions. We have a set of curated questions, and after that, soon we'd open it up for participants for Q&As, and that would be an opportunity for everyone to engage, learn from some of the organizations who have been implementing such partnerships on ground, and looking at both the promises and trade-offs. That would be a chance for us to learn together. and then we'd end up with some synthesis and closing. Before we get to the topic of the day, just wanted to give a bit of introduction to Global Schools Forum for who they might not know. At Global Schools Forum, we support non-state education organizations in low and middle income countries to innovate, deepen impact, and achieve scale. We've been around since 2017 and work across regions like Asia, Africa, Latin America. And our work has been to really work with organizations and support them with their solutions and taking them to a larger scale so that it improves education outcomes for underserved children. We work across four key strands, which is on community, knowledge, funding, and partnerships. And our global community spans across 222 organizations, 72 countries, 162 million children so far, with 1.55 million schools. So once again, welcome to this network. Welcome to Global Schools Forum. Now, diving deep into the partnership model and what we are trying to discuss today. Whenever we are discussing foundational literacy and numeracy partnerships, there's often a default route to it, which is to look at how governments and nonprofits are working together. For all the good reasons, that's something that has been there and one of the core focus areas. But there's also a lot of work that we see our partner organizations doing across Global South, where some of the FLN driven work is being routed through community embedded partnerships. Now, what does that mean really? It essentially engages with youth leaders, parents, caregivers, women entrepreneurs, local NGOs, and peer networks. And the idea is to not just look at partnerships for something that has come up from top down, but also to galvanize and mobilize the support and the collective wisdom and knowledge that we see across the rank and file. And that's where today's partnership conversation is going to be about. How do we look at partnering for scale beyond just government? Now, when we talk about partnerships and when we talk about ground up partnerships, for some of the organizations who would just start up and discuss with us what their models and approaches have been, I think what we are also realizing in this scope is that there are three sort of main areas where we see some of these ground up partnerships really making an impact and making it more durable, if I may say so. The first is about reaching the unreached, which is where some of these partnership models have really gone beyond just urban local areas to remote, rural, underserved places. And that's where often we have seen conventional top down delivery models struggle to reach. So that's where some of the ground up partnerships have been able to make a foray into, which is what we'll learn more today. There's also a point about ownership and contextualization. The fact that a ground up partnership model starts and adapts from the realities of the local context, it also starts looking at building the ownership that often outlasts, say, a program funding cycle or some of the political turnovers that we often see and characterized by the government partnerships in general. But that, of course, is dependent and hinging much on trust and legitimacy. How do we see the credibility and some of the voices from the ground coming together and that being shared, their voices coming up on how students and how children should learn? That's something that ground up partnerships also help us enable. And today, what we would do over the course of the session is to understand some of these diverse community rooted partnership models that non state actors are leveraging to scale FLN efforts. We would also love to learn about practical insights, lessons at different stages of scaling through these partnership models, and then try to collectively identify what are some of the principles and practices that can be contextualized and adapted by other practitioners and implementers in the GSF community and beyond. So would love for you all to pitch in, come in at different points in time, do share your questions, thoughts, and ideas, and we would be really welcoming to know what your model and your approach has been for partnerships. Now, allow me to introduce our speakers for today. We have Devyani Parshat from Pratham International, the Chief Program Officer for Education. Welcome, Devyani. Devyani leads global efforts to strengthen education delivery and foundational learning across Asia, Latin America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. So we would love to hear from you about cross-country examples and experiences that you have had with Pratham. We also have Craig Paxton, Executive Director and co-founder, Axium Education. Craig co-founded Axium Education, a community-based nonprofit dedicated to improving educational outcomes in rural South African schools. And we have Victoria Peill from Duara Education. Victoria founded Duara Education. She's a social entrepreneur focusing on transforming communities through accessible, high quality education. And we have been fortunate to have both Craig and Victoria, Axium and Duara Education as part of our Impact at Scale Labs program at Global Schools Forum. And over the last 18 months, we have been working and learning with them on how community-based partnerships really go deep down and how does it build on trust, legitimacy, and credibility. So without further ado, I would like to move to our speakers and would love to hear from you all an introductory thought, an idea on what in your context do you see, what does it mean for partnering with communities to deliver and scale FLN? If you could walk us through the journey briefly and tell us about moments, challenges, ideas that really makes you believe in this approach. Over to Devyani, if you may want to start out.
Great. Thanks so much, Ratul, and good morning to everybody from Bogota. I actually had a few slides that I'm going to share as I share my thoughts today. For those of you who are not familiar with Pratham was born more than 30 years ago with a very simple idea. How can we improve access and quality of early childhood education in the slums of Mumbai? So Pratham was really born as a way to kind of create something meaningful with communities and working together with the actors in the community, not just the members of the community, but local governments, businesses, really the idea of bringing everyone together to be very focused on a particular solution or a particular idea to really transform education. And I think even today, we really believe in the idea that learning happens everywhere. And we have over the years, been able to work with schools, of course, but in communities, in villages, in slums, in homes, in spaces, under trees, really to say, how do we make sure that there are learning opportunities everywhere for children? And we're building an ecosystem of learning and growth in the communities in which we work. So really, truly believe in this idea of, it takes a village to raise a child. We take this very seriously. And we try to understand how can we ensure that parents, community members understand that education is not solely the responsibility of the school. Because in many communities, I'm sure we can all appreciate that parents sometimes believe that, my child is going to school and they should be learning, and that the school has to take that responsibility. So we try to broaden that. We try to build connections between homes and communities and schools, and make sure that we're building a sense of ownership and agency in the local actors. And one example of this is, the recent work we've been doing now, I'd say for almost past 10 years, with our Hamara Gaon model. And for those who don't understand Hindi, that means our village. And the idea really is, how do you, over a period of multiple years, build not just quality education programs in a community, but involve all local actors in a meaningful way, so that you're not just coming in with the idea that, okay, we're going to do something 1 year, improve learning for children in, early years, or improve FLN and then step away, but are really building a long-term commitment to that community. And we've seen that really creating an opportunity for youth, for family members to get involved and say, how can we help? And I think in our experience, we've had some key factors that have enabled this community engagement over the years. The first, it may sound quite specific, but this idea of making learning visible. Often parents, young people, elders in the community do not have a good understanding of what's happening with children's education. And I think making that visible through simple tools like the kind of assessments that we use to measure reading and math, can be really powerful. And we have had experiences of doing community-led efforts, such as how can we work together to create a report card for our village? Right? How can we use these assessments, assess all young children and say, here's what's happening in our village. So giving that agency back and saying you are really in control of your children's education as a community. And it's not just about the parents of the school, creating opportunities for participation with young mothers. We have tried these ideas of school readiness fairs. How can we get children who are just entering school, bring their mothers, bring their grandparents, who are often the caregivers, and do simple activities to say, this is not about learning happening only in the school. Can we all come into the school and make this a collaboration? Can we see how we can play games with our children and really help with their learning? And then giving some tools, right? So can young people in the community really actually conduct learning activities with children? And so that idea of empowerment, engagement, collaboration has been really interesting. And now this work, that our experience over the years has also started to obviously influence the work that we do internationally outside of India. And I thought I'd share some interesting examples today because, we in India, of course, we have a lot of different contexts and a lot of variety in the culture, in the conditions that could enable this type of community engagement. But when we went to contexts outside of India, we realized we had to even broaden that perspective much further. So what's really the core, right? The core is we want to make sure that communities can be part of children's education, and we want to create these opportunities for them to contribute. And we found, like in contexts in Central America with our partner Glasswing, that there were issues that we had not imagined in most contexts in which we have worked, complex safety issues, sometimes trust issues within neighbors, communities, because there was local violence, a lot of issues that, as outsiders, we had to open up our minds to say, okay, now in this context, how do we really break away? So we said, okay, we can't go into the communities. We can't create these community groups and community efforts, but we can bring community into the school. So we really focused that effort on saying, how do you bring community into the school? How do you create safe spaces, using WhatsApp platforms, etc., so that parents can engage without having to be physically co-located, etc., which was a big part of the way of how we brought empowerment to communities in India. And then, working with our partners in Uganda called Yared, who are really focused on these refugee settlements. So the idea of, every context is very different. We have to bring that local context, that local ownership, and that local leadership if we truly want to design something that's meaningful for that community and that is going to last over time. So in Uganda, Yared works with young children who are mostly coming from refugee families who live in these refugee settlements to bridge them to formal school. So that connection between community and school as well, and use teaching at the right level as a mechanism to enable that bridging. So some sort of takeaways, keep it simple. Data, information is very useful for communities. We know there is a lot of evidence around this, but how do you make that really tangible and contribute to learning? Make sure that we are giving ideas and solutions. I think that's something that we have learned over the years has been very, very powerful. So beyond information, what can I do, right? And how do we really make it possible? And make sure that we are hyper contextualized and really focusing on what is needed for that community. So I'll stop there. Thank you and look forward to learning from the others and to questions.
Thank you so much, Devyani, for the perspective. Of course, knowing Pratham's work in India and also now in Africa, this is a great range and quite a years of work to learn from. So would love to deep dive into some of it subsequently. But thank you for the introductory note. Up next, do we have Craig, if you would want to come up? And same question for you. What does the community-led partnership really mean for Axium Education in South Africa?
Sure. Thanks, Ratul, and hi everyone. Great to be with you. So Axiom is based in deep rural villages in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. And I guess for many of us here, part of the reality of the African continent and much of the developing world still is rural. And I think for many people in the developed world, rural is seen as this kind of thin sliver of society. It's a margin like that most people don't think about. But certainly in South Africa, 30 to 40% of our schools are in rural communities. And so being based where we are has given us a window into really how a bunch of children grow up and see the world. And so it really got us thinking. We initially started as a maths and science high school type of catch-up program, but very quickly became aware of two things. Firstly, that basic literacy, the stats are like 80% of our children are not reading by grade 4 across the country. But at the same time, around the village, there were so many young people that had finished school and yet were still there. Their grade 12 or exit qualification hadn't qualified them for anything in life, so to speak. And yet these young people had so much potential. They knew their community, they knew the children in the community. And at the same time, we've been reading about, actually, nice to have Devyani on the panel. We've been reading about Pratham's work and how mobilizing youth to do things like teaching at the right level, kind of this idea of community education workers after the community health worker kind of concept. And so we started with some very loose pilots of how can we put these young people to work in school classrooms in a way that helps the schools, helps teachers, helps kids, most importantly, but also actually helps these young people to find a pathway and a stepping stone into something better or the next step on their journey. And so we kind of experimented with what this might look like, eventually landed on a teaching at the right level type of model, but not for as a catch-up in grades 4 through 6, where I think it's mostly implemented. But we thought about how kids are coming into school already behind. So how do we start right as they enter with the kinds of additional supports in foundation phase or grade R, 1, 2, and 3 classrooms that would set these young kids up for success in their literacy and numeracy journeys. So, and then, as these things work, the program grew and it got better and more refined. But what we started to see is that these young people, many would leave us and go on to bigger and better things, which was fantastic. But many of them just owned this program in a way that I, who was from outside the community, never could. And so really started running with it and refined the program, eventually led the program. We're taking it into new schools and communities in really wonderful, powerful ways. And it's those same youth now that are driving it into new communities around the province, which is really exciting. The other thing that came across our path, and we'll talk more later about scale, but in South Africa, we're fortunate in that there is a huge number of public employment programs. Around 750,000 people are employed on these state-funded programs. And so starting to weave that in as a possible route to a national kind of program where these young people from villages around the country could start to be put to really useful work in schools has been our kind of motivating ambition to say, yes, we're doing work in a certain number of villages and schools, but how could this become something that's helpful to many, many more children, communities, youth around the country? Let me close it there, Ratul, and we'll talk more.
That is amazing. Thank you so much, Craig, for sharing this. Given that we have worked with Axium closely over the last couple of months, I think something that really stands out for us is how the opportunity that there was a particular group of youth who you wanted to involve in education, and then there was a need at the school level where teachers needed that kind of support, mentoring, and I think merging those two things have been really fascinating to see. Would love to know more about some of the delivery nuances around it when we chat more. So thank you for now. Victoria, over to you then. Share with us about how your journey has been so far with Duara Education and what is community-led partnership really been, in the model, in your approach.
Thank you so much, Ratul, and Hi, everybody. So wonderful to be here. I'm also going to share a few pages to give a bit of an impression. Can you see that? Yeah. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so Duara started because of the same challenge that I think all of us are here for, which is that high quality education is not yet as accessible to most children in the Global South. And we saw a specific opportunity to address this, which is that there are so many passionate teachers, especially female teachers in communities who dream of starting their own school, but can't make it real because they feel they don't have the skills or the training, the tools, the resources, or the capital to do this. And so Duara started with the question of what if we could transform or support those teachers to become school entrepreneurs. And this is now what we do. We partner with teachers in their given community and help them to first launch and then grow their school into an affordable school that is rooted into the community and becomes financially sustainable. And then for that school, once it's up and running, it not only brings quality education to the learners in the respective school and supports their parents through also training, but also becomes really an engine for change in a given community through through engaging the community in skills training, in different ways of engaging community days to really drive that commitment and engagement around the community. The way that we do it, just a quick overview, is that we basically have a proven path, which brings in teachers, equips them with everything that they need in an incubator, gives them the curriculum, the entire operational tools and system, and the backend and admin partnerships, and then embeds them in a collective of peers who are doing the same, which becomes like a sisterhood. And we basically really believe that this model, and we see it now in the early days. We started 2.5 years ago, now have 11 schools running, want to grow this to 40 schools by the end of the year around Kenya. And we really believe that what works is that these teachers are entrepreneurs in their communities who are very much known and trusted in their community, who know the context, who know the constraints, who know the challenges, who know the needs, and to also have a lot of accountability and agency, and that they are then embedded in a network with each other that supports each other. So a community themselves, that there's of course a backend that supports them, and that the financing is regenerative. And the learning then in each of the schools is very holistic and basically focuses on both strong academics and numeracy and literacy, as well as life skills and more. And we really set it up so that community members are part of those who teach and who support learners in their journey, as well as that the space of the community really is the part of the school, because those schools are they're micro schools, they're small, up to 80 learners, and we really go out into each of the communities, or each school goes out to be very present in that. A few impressions of how it looks like in a Duara school. And so I believe that, I think ultimately what Duara is about is that, so if we're not building a network of schools, but it's basically a system that we're building which enables communities to create their own high quality schools, and that those schools that are then led and owned by a trusted female teacher who has the agency to do it in a way that is aligned with what the community needs, who has the ownership to really bring to life high quality and to do it in an entrepreneurial way, and who has the accountability to ensure that the quality meets the needs of the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And if I may, for the rest of the participants, these schools are all new schools that you set up in communities where you work with, not existing schools where you work. So how does the configuration work?
Those are, for now, those are new schools that we're setting up, but we're also beginning to right now partner with existing schools who reach out to us, who basically then look to take on some of our curriculum or the operational platform basically. But that's sort of a next layer that we're going into out of the demand from schools. Thank you.
Super fascinating. Thank you, everyone. And I think while I was hearing all of you, what really came to my mind is that, of course, there's a lot of promise that it holds on how we can galvanize the support from youth leaders, from community members, parents, women entrepreneurs. Like, each of your models are a testament to that. What it also came to my mind is, what about the other side of it, which means the trade-offs, the points where, often things are not that hunky-dory. And I think what I would love to deep dive into, before we open it up for an interaction with the other participants, is just to know a little bit more about those aspects of your model, of your work, where things that the way you had planned, you thought, may not have really gone that way. Or probably there are areas that we need to focus on more, given how the current narrative or structuring of FLN has been. Just on that, I think maybe if I could start with you, Devyani. I wanted to understand, and I think you mentioned a couple of important points about how to build agency in local community, making learning visible. And I think what stuck with me was about the point of contextualizing for every geography that you would get in. What I wanted to understand is now, when geographies change, are there certain non-negotiables, be it in your ways of working on your models, that stayed sort of consistent? From India, where Pratham has seen the work starting from FLN, where now we have a national FLN mission, to places in Africa where FLN is still sort of coming up in the radar of education priority. What have you really kept as sacrosanct in your model, and what are some things that you are changing as you go ahead with stakeholder roles, plans, etc.?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ratul. I think, I covered some of this when I was talking earlier, but just to reiterate, I think that it's important to believe that learning happens everywhere, and that journey to get to that common understanding with communities can look quite different in different contexts. I think that is a common sort of belief that we work towards, or almost a starting point to say, how do we build that common belief that learning happens everywhere, is not just restricted to the school, and then getting started from there to say, there are many ways to improve learning. So it's not to say that there is only one solution, but the things that are important for us is we must know what's happening with children's learning. So some way to measure, to understand. I think that's something that remains constant across the board. You may have very different types of delivery models or contexts in which communities are getting involved in children's learning, but we should know what we're dealing with, right? So how do you bring measurement into the conversation right from the beginning? I'd say one, and then the other, of course, is making sure that we are giving tangible ideas. So sometimes, we may give lots of ideas to communities, and I think in our experience we find that unless we zero in and focus on a very specific approach to solve a particular problem. So let's say in the context of Mumbai back in the day, it was, how do we make sure that all children in the slums of Mumbai have access to quality early childhood education, and here's a model to enable that, right? So making that problem very clear and making the solution very clear, and then there can be many other things. Similarly in Central America, we said we know that children don't have the basic reading and math skills in early grades. There is enough evidence to say that parents' involvement, caregiver involvement is important. So how do we create that model? So that model was come into the schools, right? Create these spaces for parents. And then similarly in refugee settlements in Uganda, there are so many complexities, right? So how do you create a completely community-based model that is focusing on a very specific approach, that these children need to learn to read and do basic math before they get mainstreamed into formal Ugandan schools, and the refugee communities can work with these children in this particular way. So coming from a broad problem, broad idea, and becoming very specific, I think that's kind of the non-negotiable, but at the same time, making sure that there is complete flexibility to ensure that the models are designed to suit really the needs of each of these communities.
Very useful. Thank you. I think just to build on that thread, I'd probably move to Victoria. Devyani here talked about how we can think of the macro and also then add in micro. In your case, where you had started out with 4 schools, 10 schools, now continuing, and probably it would go even far in the future. How do you hold some of the components of quality, fidelity, as you're moving from one school to other, you're expanding, new teachers coming in. There must be so many sort of moving components to work on. What has been your secret sauce to balance fidelity with quality in a more micro to macro situation?
Thanks, Ratul. Yeah, it's such an important and yeah, very, very relevant question for us. And it's something that we honestly continue to build, to iterate, to learn, to try. I think for us, one is that what I shared earlier, like I think inherent in the model, and this is because we believe of the teacher entrepreneurship, there is so much quality accountability already in it, because every teacher lives in the community. She goes to the hairdresser there, like she goes to the market there, and parents literally see her on the street all the time. So there is a lot of inherent quality, which is something that we believe is really powerful. But I think the way that we've then continuously from that thought about the quality, fidelity, but also about sort of what do we like, what is locally adapted, and what does the teacher adjust versus sort of where do we say, okay, this is now across sort of the Duara collective, this stands still. So that the one thing is that we've sort of, really basically set up this spectrum of what is on the one side fully owned by the teacher and school entrepreneur, and she can sort of make all of the decisions. And in the center of that spectrum, sort of things that are where the teacher can implement those things or implement the things, but there's a lot of like principles that we set. And then on the other side of the spectrum is basically what is set as Duara. And so that's one spectrum that we've drawn, and where we now over the last years basically have, in collaboration and constant conversation with the school entrepreneurs, defined where do we sit on this spectrum. So things of basically what is your let's start on this side of the spectrum. Child safeguarding, right? We're saying, okay, not every school is defining their child safeguarding policies themselves, but this is something where we just say this is across the collective, this is everybody's doing this. But then when it comes to, for example, curriculum implementation, we do have certain standards in terms of our approach. We have outcomes that we want to meet, but the way that you bring this project to life, the way that you engage your community, the way that you bring in local materials, whatever it is, that is up to you. The same, for example, when it comes to nutrition, we say, okay, these are the nutrition levels that we want to meet, and these are sort of our principles here. But whatever is locally available on the market, whatever you feel works for your community, for your school, you can bring that to life. And so it's really that everything that we do, we're looking at around across this spectrum. That's been one way of thinking about it. The other way is then we said, okay, we also shift that over time. So a school entrepreneur who just started out has probably is more has more guidance, and we're basically working with her more closely to work on across all of those elements. But the more you grow, and we call it sort of our thriving journey or thriving map, if you're moving across those stages, you have more and more sort of basically freedom to do the things that you want to do in the way that you want to do them, as long as we sort of say, okay, the outcomes are there. And then lastly, we've basically, together with all of the school entrepreneurs, established, in terms of now quality and fidelity, a Duara way. And that is sort of a jointly developed standard to say, okay, across learning, across operations, parent engagement, community engagement, everything that we do, this is what we all commit to. And there again, the entrepreneurial model comes in and says, like, this is, you are opting in by being part of this, you're opting in, and you have the agency to basically live up to this. And we support you through coaching, through tools and everything, but this is a mutually agreed standard. And that creates a lot of peer accountability as well, because you know that the school in the next community has a similar standard, and so you hold each other accountable to that. That would be my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, I like this dual framing where there is enough flexibility, yet at the same time, some larger principles to really adhere to or just refer to. Um, I guess just shifting gears now, I also wanted to touch upon the points about how does some of the practicalities for such partnerships really look like? Um, and I am fully cognizant that we have framed this particular topic looking at more ground up community based partnerships. Um, but across all your models, I think with Axiom particularly, that's something that we have seen recently that you are also looking at, um, engaging with other partner organizations, trying to sort of diversify your methods of delivery. Pratham has certainly done something, for a couple of years now, where it started from direct delivery to now technical support to governments across. I guess what I wanted to understand here is how do you as organizations take that kind of a decision? And at what level do you think is the tipping point where the work that you have done with community directly kind of gives you enough information or insights that you could then pass it on to other organizations or maybe to even government? Because I think while reading some of the comments that have also come in, there are a lot of comments about partnerships equal to collaboration, listening, working with government. So I'm guessing even if it's working with community, there is an aspect of working with government. So to summarize, there are two parts to this question. One is how do you look at moving from partnerships, direct delivery to supporting other organizations? And the second part is in this whole spectrum of things, where do governments come in? How do you build or bridge that relation between ground up and top to bottom partnerships? Craig, if you may want to start out and then open to anyone who would want to respond.
Yeah, so we reached this point in our kind of growth to say we'd hit about 50 schools. Our budgets were at full stretch, and it became apparent to us that kind of adding that extra school or that extra new community that we were working with, wonderful for that new community and that new school, but actually, like if the end goal here was to build a program that we felt not necessarily the Axiom program, but a national program for rural children to receive these kinds of extra supports, it didn't make sense for us to stretch ourselves to the point that getting that extra school is going to be, a huge milestone for us. And so if you like, that part of the journey was building the model, building the factory that helps to shape this program into something that's useful for kids, useful for schools and communities. And then the next phase of work for us is really about, so how do we start to advocate? How do we start to recruit and enable government and other partners to start to pick up some of these ideas? Not necessarily the Axiom Nobalisa program, which it's called, but a version of it that would still be helpful. And so and that's exactly the point we're in now running a fairly large scale program is a lot of work in itself. And so the kinds of tensions that we've been facing recently have been about, okay, how much effort do we put into the partnership aspect of our work versus how much do we just keep running a program and keep making it better and better and better? And we probably could do both, but at some point there's some strategic choices around where we should be putting our best people and our kind of best efforts. Like another aspect of that is if the end goal is to work with government, how do you build those partnership muscles in a way that's less high stakes? And that's where it's been helpful for us to find those kind of trusted local partners that we can operate through or partner with in order to deliver the Nobalisa program. And so that's been a helpful kind of, if we're not quite ready to go to that full scale, like how do we still build similar kinds of muscles that get us part of the way there, grow our reach, and we learn about what it's like to work with partners in a fairly safe space. So those are some of the ways in which we're thinking about and are wrestling with some real kind of tensions around how to make these things work when you are thinking about something to help more kids.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, Ratul, what's been very interesting in India is that, like some of the other contexts in which we work, there is universal access pretty much to education. And in fact, interestingly, in India, we have a early childhood system. I wouldn't say early childhood education system, but early childhood care system that is also universal. So for us at Pratham, when we have been building these community models, the idea has really been to say, one, how do we create opportunities for demonstration, right? To say that this is something that can work, and then how does that go into the system? But more importantly, build these community engagement models over the existing government systems, right? So we work with children in government schools. We work in villages and rural communities. The majority of the children are going to these government schools. We are working with mothers, bringing them into the Anganwadis, for example, which are the early childhood care systems, which are in these very communities and are run by government. So to say not to replicate, but to work with these existing systems and bring this community layer and see how that can work. And that doesn't have to start at scale, right? That can start pretty small with quite intensive, engagement. And that then we've seen some examples now of governments actually taking on that community piece. So for example, we work with the ICDS in Maharashtra on these school readiness fairs, which are actually held now for mothers across the state, mothers and caregivers, and organized by the government school system. So going from a place of we don't know, parents don't care, parents saying, oh, school is too out of reach, to then creating something very tangible that can bring communities and governments together. And I think it's been very meaningful to see that we know that there are challenges for government to get to community and community to get to government, but sometimes these sort of simple ideas and solutions can help bridge that gap and then scale. Because at Pratham, we work with governments because they are the most important actor for children's education, right? That's the idea. Our goal is not systems change or scale. Our goal is that every child should have the opportunity to improve learning. And that's going to be possible if you're working through the government system, right? Because that's the system that's delivering education at scale. So I think if you have that kind of mindset, then maybe it makes it a bit more easier to work to bring these different aspects together.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you all. I think very interesting nuance that you bring in here. Maybe just last sort of question before we open it up to the audience. Certainly, I think this is not an either-or question. At some point in time, even if we are going for a community-based model, we know that there has to be involvement with government. There has to be larger collaboration for it to sort of scale, work in larger numbers. But I think somewhere the question, or probably I don't know if you all see this as a tension, where in this bit to make it more mission led, something that we need to achieve sooner, that needs to be done really quick and fast. When we then look at capacity building of the larger community and bringing their ownership up and getting really the voices from the ground up, does it usually sort of work in a mission led mode, or does it also need to fundamentally change the way we perceive systems reform or really working at scale? Just want to understand how do you all sort of sit within this point about mission mode, quick sort of delivery versus really long lasting capacity building, which may be a point about how some of these things could be sustained. Any quick sort of response would be great.
So this is my personal response, not a Pratham response. I think both are important. I think the mission mode kind of really helps you catalyze at scale, especially in contexts like India. We have seen that we can mobilize action at scale when we are working in this kind of mission mode, that we are trying to achieve something very specific in a short period of time. And then that links to, a much more longer, deeper engagement. I think especially in working with communities, not so much with governments, these longer, deeper engagements are very critical, but often the hardest to scale. So how do you balance this? There is a subset in which I'm, going long and deep, and there is some sporadic kind of much more widespread impact that we can create through these mission mode activities. So, how do you balance both is something that I think is most important. It's not one versus the other.
Okay, super. Thank you. And I think with this, I would probably want to open this up to the audience. There are a couple of questions that have come in for you all. Um, I think first is on from Magat Story for Devyani and Craig. Do you partner with schools to access more families? How do you process and what kind of partnerships do you put in place? I think this is a larger question about your partnership model, and how do you sort of embed partnerships within families and schools?
Can go. Yeah, thank you for the question. So we do work through schools, and when we're accessing these youth, part of the recruitment process is to make sure that we're consulting almost as a verification process. We're asking both the school principal and school kind of senior management to say, can you vet for this person? Because for all that we might get police clearances and other good things that child protection says we should do, often the best kind of word is the local one. So both from the school and then from community elders, we also ask, are these the right people to be working with children in the village? So that's part of our process for finding those young people. And then often we do, in terms of how we then access families and things, we do run reading clubs and things like that after school, which gives us access. And those are often based in people's homes and things. So there is a reach out to the community from that. I think one of the wonderful things about rural communities is that the social fabric and the sense of connection is very much there, which we often have lost in cities. And so there are very deep connections to the home, between the home and the school, in ways that yeah, again, are often lost when we talk about urban type of settings.
Just to add a small point, agree with everything Craig said, but I think also the reality that sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can work with schools to access families, and sometimes you just can't, because there is often not even the willingness, especially as Craig said, in the more sort of semi-urban, urban areas, the big cities, that willingness is not there to engage with community. So you have to find other means to establish that communication with communities, going into communities yourself, organizing some initial events in schools to get communities to come and sign up and say, we want to be part of something broader. Or of course, having your own volunteers and teams on the ground who actually physically go into these communities and make that connection. So I think that reality is also there, that sometimes you just can't work through schools.
Okay. We have two other questions, and anybody from audience, if you would want to unmute and just come in and ask your question, that's also fine. This is from Agnes Wanohi. I think this was to Victoria. Yeah, but Agnes, if you would want to come in and just share if there's any particular point that you wanted Victoria to elaborate on, that'd be great.
Now?
Hey, hi, Agnes.
Yes, hi. Yeah, I've just heard about the work that Victoria and the team are doing in Kenya. I am Kenyan and would like to hear more about it. So I was wondering whether I could just give her a number and then we can talk later.
Yeah, we can do that. I love that. Just put your number or email in the chat. Otherwise, I'll find an email address in there. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Super. Laura Pierce, I think you also have a question for Craig. I can read it out, but if you have any follow-ups, please do come in. I think, Craig, this was related to your partnership modalities. When you loop in local partners, are you providing them training to upskill, roll out youth talent model? Likewise, what type of activities are the young talent doing within schools to enhance learning? But yeah, if you can respond, and Laura, if you want to come in for any follow-ups, please do.
Yeah, so in terms of how we've partnered with other organizations, I think that has depended, of course, on the partner. where they are directly implementing our program, we've kind of left the line management piece of who these young people report to them, to that partner. And then our job is to provide the materials, the training, the coaching that enables those young people then to go on and run an effective program. And I would say we're still very much in the learning processes of how closely we need to work alongside to make sure that it is run well. And I think but of course, that's part of the learning of trying to, if we imagine this thing operating in a government system, kind of how close to fidelity can you get the program? And that's part of what we're trying to learn about when someone else is operating and line managing the staff. I think the second half of that question, if I understood it correctly, was around what some of that training and coaching looks like. And again, I continue to just be inspired by these young people who, again, the kind of state system has spat out and don't have on paper the kind of qualifications, yet they respond to training and coaching in ways that really are phenomenal, and they just flourish when there are those kinds of supports, and particularly when it's led by kind of young people like them that are from the neighboring village and are just maybe further down the journey. So I think there's so much to be said for how local young people can drive these kinds of things in really powerful ways. So yeah, thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Craig. That answered it. Thank you.
Super. Another question from Zainab Hamid. Zainab, if you are still if you would want to come in and ask your question directly.
Sure, I can ask it. So this is amazing work you guys are doing. We're all who are working in education need those community access and need the community to help themselves first before we can even help them. So we are trying to do something in Pakistan, which is also very challenging. We have an EdTech platform and we're trying to do foundational literacy. So maybe something close to what Pratham is doing. And we have a self-learning app which goes into these communities. We partner with community, with people who are already working in uplift of communities. We don't go directly into communities because we find it to be extremely challenging. Pratham would be able to relate maybe more because the culturally, each area that we work in, we have 4 provinces and each province have different regional, different setups. So you have to understand those setups before you go into those communities. So we have a double warm-up by just not only enabling the communities, but also using technology in these communities. So I just wanted to get some insights if somebody has used that and something that's worked, some watch out, some guidance that we could get from here.
I can come in, and I'm sure others might have thoughts as well. And there's another question in the Q&A. If it's okay, I can take both at once. So, first I'll take the question that's in the Q&A by Noluthando. What has been the sustainability of your programs in some of the communities that you work with? I think it's not about outlasting funding. Honestly, especially in the case of India, it's about that continuous engagement and support. So this kind of links to, the question that you just had, Zainab, that how can you continue to maintain ongoing engagement with communities and community actors, even beyond, let's say, an intensive engagement period? In our case, for example, if we work for a period of 3 years in certain villages, we have been extensively using WhatsApp to build community groups and to enable engagement, not just as a way for sharing information, but also as a means to bring them together and ask questions and create a back and forth. So really basic tech, right? So not going in with, sophisticated platforms and so on and so forth. At this stage in the communities, we've done more of that with the school systems where we find it works well, but really this idea of here's a space, right? Here is information. We'll, especially like, for example, during COVID, we had a contact with thousands and thousands of communities across the country, just sending, every day something. Like, here's a little game you can play with your kids, or here's a little exercise you can do with your kids through SMS. So I think what's important more than outlasting funding is how do you continue? What are some innovative ways to maintain that continuous engagement with community actors so that they feel encouraged, they feel heard, they feel they are working with somebody, so they're not just on their own and, have their own life kind of ahead of them, so they forget about some of these things. And technology can play a big role there, is what we've seen, even if we're just talking about basic tech like WhatsApp and SMS and so on. I don't know if Craig and Victoria have additions to both those questions.
Okay, we may still have time for one or two other questions. If anybody would have any questions, please feel free to type out or just unmute yourself. We can get you in. Would love to hear any thoughts or questions that you may have for our panelists.
Susanna has a question about technology, Ratul. I'm not sure if we've answered that, but our experience with technology is we've tried a bunch of online programs over the years and continue to believe there are helpful things there. Our learning there, though, has been, particularly in our context, with, yes, there is cell phone connectivity, but it's patchy. And I'm aware that there are a bunch of offline solutions as well, but that almost where we needed to start was firstly like the human-to-human connection around getting basic foundations for literacy and numeracy in place before those platforms start to become useful. So we almost, having gone quite far down the line of tech platforms, came back a little bit to say, okay, how can these young people be helpful to just get kids to a point where, yes, then they can engage with these differentiated offerings that can accelerate learning if done in the right way.
Maybe, yeah, just to build on this question on technology from our side. I mean, I think we've probably very obvious by now or mainstream by now, but I think we've come down to that WhatsApp is and is in so many places and in all of the communities so far the best tool that we've used. We've had lots of different approaches and tried out so much, and we just saw that if we connect everything that we do in terms of technology to WhatsApp, be it sort of on the school entrepreneur side, the parent side, not yet on the learner side, but basically we're channeling through WhatsApp, through the parents, then things for the learners. That has been basically just the one tool that works incredibly well. And then again, in WhatsApp, we found that making it as much as basically text to speech as possible and sort of translating everything that we do into small voice notes, small videos, whatever it is. Because reading either is not as comfortable for everybody, but also just, I think generationally, just people don't read so much anymore. So we've just seen that the more we turn into speech or any images or short videos, and of course, thanks to today's world, this is so much easier now. But we've seen, that's basically been, WhatsApp has been sort of the main channel that we use for so much of it, and it's incredible of what is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there's another question, probably the last one that we'll take. That's from Vibhusha regarding the crux of government partnership in Indian context. I think what I would also want to extend this question, and something that I thought I'd ask you all towards the end, is the point about all of this might work when you have a supporting system, community members are open for you all to engage in, and everything sort of is, if not entirely rosy, but at least conducive for organizations to go to the ground and work. In such kind of a situation where you have maybe necessary guarding from, say, some of the governments, or maybe where they require certain permission, approvals, even to sort of get to school level or working with community. How have you all been sort of navigating that kind of challenge? And to Vibhu's question, what does it really mean as the crux of partnership, cutting across both government and community?
Okay, I'll go first. So I can give you a very kind of pertinent, real example for us now is how we've engaged with government around curriculum. So, you know, the government's mandate is to deliver this curriculum at a certain pace, and yet we know that that certain pace leaves a bunch of children behind, and yet to engage government on altering that curriculum or thinking about things in a different way, like teaching at the right level might, is really a complicated conversation. And so we've had to tread quite carefully, and the work we're currently doing is to say, all right, so you know, the government may not be able to say up front, yes, this curriculum isn't serving all children. But so then how do we think about catch up or remedial or figuring out backlogs in a way that doesn't make the government look bad, but still acknowledges that there's a real challenge and that children are being left behind? And so some kind of a solution that bridges curriculum expectations with the reality of where children are needs to somehow come into the national conversation around accelerating learning in alternative ways that might not be a traditional classroom setup, which I think is where this kind of a model really can have such power.
So I think this idea of like, how do you work with government? And, you know, this question that you're asking about barriers and lack of openness, I think for me, that's the norm everywhere. Like, I don't think you usually go into a new context and find enabling conditions, whether it's in working with the government or working with communities. I think that has to be built over time. So just the same, I think it's the same with the communities as well. Again, going back to this point that I was making earlier, sometimes an easy way to engage is through something very tangible, right? Like I gave you this example of Central America with this idea of, you know, communities coming together and engaging with the school and all was just like, no, because of a lot of other reasons that were completely out of our control. So we created something tangible and said, let's begin with this. So rather than trying to change the conditions and create enabling conditions, you find a solution that can operate in those existing conditions and begin with that, right? So I think that's been interesting for us. And I think one thing with governments that sometimes I think we underestimate the power of is demonstration. With Pratham, we have strongly believed that it's important to show that this can work in your context and then talk to the government rather than go to the governments with something very hypothetical or, you know, conceptual and say, now imagine, you know, how this is going to work. And we've had the privilege of being able to do that in India over and over again. But I think internationally, what we're seeing is that this cross-cultural or cross-contextual demonstration is also very powerful. So, you know, for a government in Malawi to see what Zambia is doing, because, you know, it's in the same region. And, you know, if this is how Zambia is doing it, maybe we can do it as well. So that power of demonstration, I think sometimes we underestimate and we focus very much on, you know, here's the solution and, you know, here's how it's going to work in your system. Maybe we just need to step away from that and say, you know, if this is a problem that you want to solve, go see how your neighbors are doing it. And that's one way to get inspired, or how is this happening through kind of a direct delivery model in your own state in the context of India.
Sounds good. Anything else, Victoria, from your side?
I mean, I think there's definitely lots to build on. I think just the demonstration part is something that also we found is really, really important, both from the government side, but also just parents and communities. And that just takes time also, as the others say. I think that's what we've found, that it just takes time to build that trust, be it with the government, and we are taking them in from the very beginning, before anybody sort of, the school entrepreneur goes out to even start her school. Like, this is one of the first engagements is with the local government that she is doing, and the same for the community. And then just to bring them along at every step of the way. And then, show, don't tell, but really to show, okay, this is now how it looks like, this is how the children are growing, this is what happens. So I think that's definitely something we've seen as really important. The other part is then really sticking to your word. I mean, it's so obvious, but so often the communities like come to the school entrepreneurs and basically say, oh yeah, but you're you're going to come in now and you're sort of saying that you do X, but then you're going to whatever increase the prices, or you're going to actually not deliver on the quality, but to just really assure that we're like, when the school entrepreneur, when we're going in with sort of a word, a promise, and this is stuck, is really important. And lastly, I'd say is again to meet the community or the government where the need is, and that is in our model obviously inherent because the school entrepreneur lives in that community and knows, but we basically to always just create then again the flexibility for the school entrepreneur to say, for example, we had protests in Kenya. I mean, this was now a year ago, but they just came up again. But to basically say, lots of the school entrepreneurs were basically then creating circles of like grieving circles and conversation circles in their schools so that the community can come together to basically talk about what has happened. So you're going beyond what a school actually is. You're going into saying, okay, what is needed here at this very moment, and that is something that was and continues to be really important in every school.
Thank you, everyone. I think this has been a fascinating conversation, and with some of the questions that have come in, really helped us sort of unpack some of the strands of how we look at ground-up partnerships. And I think we'll be launching a poll soon. And just to sort of summarize some of the pointers that we have seen coming in over the last 75 minutes, I think what I'm taking away from it is that, like any other partnership, ground-up partnerships are also not linear, adaptive, and if I may say so, complex. But there are ways which some of you have really figured some parts of it out on how to really balance the macro with the micro, or in some case, looking at structuring the micro with certain flexibility or with certain principles that we could adhere to, and then also bring into this agenda of change, of reform, by not just doing it ourselves directly, but to make a larger coalition, which in Axiom's case, we have seen with some of the organizations who have joined force, and with Pratham and with Duara, that's also something that's pretty apparent. What I'm also taking away from this conversation is that how do we make it more tangible, like any kind of partnerships, and also sort of, to think that we would go to the government or to the community to say, here's our grand lofty idea. I guess those who are part of the system and been in that same situation, because of their positionality, they have been part of continuity and change. So for us to be part of, for harbinger of change, or somebody who would really want to work with them, I think it takes for us to really bring some of the tangible pointers to them, and then also demonstrate, so that at the end of the day, some of what we are learning can be converged with and taken to the government. I'll do a much better job in summarizing this, because I think a lot of what you all have said needs a little bit of thought, reflections, and I'll put this together in form of a write-up, and I would love to share with everyone within our community, as well as hear some of your thoughts, and would love to see how all of this is going forward. So on behalf of Global Schools Forum, I would like to thank all of you, Devyani, Craig, Victoria, for agreeing to do this and for giving us time and for sharing nuggets from your work, your experience, and how this has been. And to everyone who's joined us, thank you for making time. And it's amazing to have all of you part of this spotlight session. And I hope for the next one you join us too. Thank you so much, and I would like to conclude it here.
Thanks, Ratul. Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you once again. Bye.